Hi, everybody, and welcome to Your Success Path. This is video 1 of your December Language Therapy Advance execution plan. So in this video, I am going to give you a high-level view of what you'll be learning throughout the course of next year in this program. Now, we'll get into specific treatment protocols, but sometimes when we are getting deep into a specific strategy, it's hard to see the bigger picture of where you're going. So what I want to do is give you a bird's eye view of what you'll be learning and the overall strategy and how that's organized so that you can see the big picture before we get into the specifics. Let's talk about the goal of being in this program. I aim to give you a set of systems for treating language disorders so you can get your students to their least restrictive environment as efficiently as possible. Now, when I first wrote the original Language Therapy Advance course, I used to call it a language therapy curriculum because that's really what people wanted. But I've changed because that really wasn't what it was. It was more of a process or a protocol based on a framework that helps us to organize what we're doing in our therapy. Obviously, a curriculum makes things easier, but it really isn't true to what we do as therapists because we want things to be individualized. But having said that, we don't want to start from scratch for each case. We want some type of a skeleton framework that will help narrow our focus and keep us organized so that we are using a strategic process and not just jumping around aimlessly from skill to skill. So as we go through this program, I'm going to be teaching you different strategies that you can use to build your students' meta skills so that they can increase their vocabulary that they need to succeed in school. But I want you to see the big picture and see how all of those individual strategies that I'll be teaching you over the course of the year fit into the system. Now, first, before we go on, let me tell you why having a system is so important. Now, when I say that we have a framework or a system that we can follow, this doesn't mean that we're going to follow it blindly. It just means that we're creating a process that eliminates some of the guesswork. It's kind of like when you plan out what you're going to wear for the week or what you're going to eat for dinner each night. Sometimes with the dinner example, you make better decisions when you have an organized agenda and make some of those decisions beforehand. Because if you wait until you're tired and exhausted to plan what you're going to eat, we tend to not make very good decisions. It's the same thing with therapy. You'll make better decisions if you have a system up front. So this success path is meant as a skeleton for doing that. It's not a cookie cutter program, but rather something that you can use as a starting point. You can still modify and tweak it along the way, but this will help to make some of those decisions ahead of time and give you a process to follow so that you can conserve some of your cognitive resources for more important things. Now you'll notice as you're going through this program that there isn't a lot of fluff in the system. And the reason that I've planned it that way is because you don't need it to get results. So don't get me wrong, I'm not against having nice materials or doing crafts with your students to make it fun or looking for new apps and games. Those things are great, but we don't start with those. We start with the system first and then add all of those extra things after we get the essentials in place. If you do it the other way, you end up just jumping around aimlessly. You can actually use those apps and games and extra things more effectively if you've got the underlying process in place first. So before I go any further with your success path, I wanted to explain a principle that I use to make sure that I'm spending my time wisely throughout the day and that I used to design this program. And it's called the Pareto Principle. So the Pareto Principle states that 20% of what we do accounts for 80% of the measurable results that we get. So that means that of all the things that you're doing throughout the day, 20% of those activities would fall in the high impact category. Using the Pareto principle, we can separate our activities into two categories. So we've got the 20%, which would be high impact, versus the low impact, or things that actually have a negative impact on our success. So in the high impact category, for my activities, I would include things like learning about evidence-based practices, studying words with my students during direct treatment time, and connecting with other SLPs to improve my therapy practices. So these things have a direct impact on my students' ability to perform in school. The things that would fall in the low impact category would be spending an excessive amount of time laminating, making copies, putting craft activities together, or just assembling a lot of stuff for my therapy activities, or spending a ton of time decorating my office and making it pretty. Now, obviously, it's okay to spend some time doing those things. Sometimes it's necessary, but it's when we get carried away that it actually ends up wasting our time and taking us away from those high impact activities. I've also got killing time on social media on there. So obviously, we know that if we're scrolling through our newsfeed, watching videos of cute puppies and kittens, it's probably not the best use of our time. But we've got to be careful with this because a lot of time that we spend could be connecting with other SLPs, because there's a lot of Facebook groups where we can actually go in there and have professional discussions. Where we've got to be careful is that if you're on Facebook, it's easy to go in there with the intention of asking a good question in a professional forum and then getting distracted by something else on your newsfeed. And then you realize that you've been on there for an hour not getting anything done. Or you're in those professional groups and you get into a debate with a random stranger on the internet about something where you're completely on opposite sides of the spectrum as far as your opinions. And that's not always the best use of time either. So we've really got to be purposeful in how we use both of these things. When we use 80-20 analysis to determine if we're actually spending our time wisely, when it comes to language therapy, you want to be asking yourself, whenever you're doing whatever you're doing, is this going to improve my students' language skills? Is this extra time I'm spending laminating or compiling these activities going to make a true difference? Or is there something else that I could be doing that would actually push them along further? Or another question that I sometimes ask myself when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed and feeling like I have to do this, this, and this, and I have to get through all these things on my to-do list, I sometimes ask myself the question, what would happen if I didn't do this thing? Would the impact be detrimental, or would it probably be okay? So that's a way that you can eliminate some of those things that you might think are essential, but they really aren't. So now let's move on to the success path. What this is a sequence of language therapy strategies that you can follow for students with language disorders. So if you were to get a student who's coming in and you know that they need explicit work in vocabulary and syntax, they've got issues with comprehension, this is a system that you could follow to ensure that you're hitting all the essential elements of vocabulary, including orthography, phonology, semantics, syntax, and morphology. So what you do is go through these strategies in order to ensure that you're hitting all of the skills your students need to get. But there is some flexibility in this system. So let me tell you what all of those strategies are and the sequence, and then I'll talk about how we can actually be flexible when we learn this and when we actually put this into practice. So first, we start out by building our students' semantic skills by doing semantic feature analysis with self-questioning. So this is when we are taking words and we're showing our students all the different pieces of semantic information. So for example, with nouns, we'd talk about the category, the function, the physical features, and we give our students a set of questions that they can use to remember that semantic information, because a lot of times our students don't have good retrieval, so we end up having to probe them with a lot of questions. So what we're doing here is we're teaching them about the different semantic features, and we're also teaching them the self-questions so that they can remember that information on their own. So once we do semantic feature analysis, the next step in the system is to take that information that they've brainstormed with that semantic analysis and then be able to use that information to define a word. And we are teaching our students the structure of a definition. So if someone asks them, what does this word mean? They know how to do it. A lot of times our students might have the information in their heads, but they don't know how to use the right sentence structure to do it. So they end up being really vague and talking around a word. So in this second step, we are teaching our students how to do that with the right format so that they can organize the information they have. Then we can take it a step further and study morphology. So we're studying the different pieces of words. We're studying prefixes and suffixes and grammatical markers so that we're taking whatever that word is and we're showing our students that if you add a prefix or a suffix, or if you take a prefix or a suffix off, that it changes the meaning of the word. And then what we can do is repeat that semantic feature analysis as we take the prefix or suffix off so that we are showing our students that can actually change the meaning of words. Then the next step, once we have done those three techniques, is that we move on to other things like teaching our students how to answer WH questions, teaching our students to combine sentences so that we're building their syntax skills, and then building their listening comprehension. So with 1, 2, and 3, we're building some of those foundational skills, and then when we move on to 4, we're transitioning to generalization because those things require some high level processing. And then once we've really hit those vocabulary skills at the sentence level, and we have targeted some of those things that cause comprehension problems, we can move on to those high level cohesion things like working on narratives with our students, or working on written essays, or high level comprehension like just reading a paragraph and answering questions about it. Because a lot of times the reason that students struggle with being able to tell a narrative or write an essay or just comprehend what they're reading is because they don't have the underlying vocabulary and syntactic skills in order to comprehend effectively. And we're addressing those comprehension skills with strategies 1, 2, 3, and 4 on this list. Now here's the catch with this sequence. We definitely want to build our students' vocabulary and syntactic and grammatical skills that we would be building in strategies 1, 2, 3, and 4 that I just mentioned before we go on to those high-level cohesion tasks like overall reading comprehension. And we can, if you want to have a structured sequence to follow with your language cases, you can do all of these strategies in order. However, you don't need to necessarily follow this sequence to a T in order for it to work. Because a lot of you are going to be coming into this program and you're not going to know all of these strategies at once to be able to go through all of these steps in order. It's okay if you learn 1, 2, 3, and 4 and just start doing them separately out of sequence. So for example, let's say you don't know how to do semantic feature analysis and you don't know how to do definition syntax. It's okay if you learn how to do the morpheme mix and match activity and work that into your therapy, and then just build one strategy at a time before you start doing this entire sequence. So the way that you are going to put this into practice is to learn strategies 1, 2, 3, and 4, just one at a time, and work into making that a habit in your practice. And then once you've learned the entire system, then that's when you are going to be able to go through this entire sequence with an individual case. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do all these things, how can I start doing this? That's definitely not the case. You definitely want to make sure that you learn 1, 2, 3, and 4 before you go on to those high-level cohesion. But if you're coming into this program and you don't know how to do those, you can just pick one, learn that, and then add another one to your practice without going in sequence. And then once you've learned all the pieces, that's when you can put that sequence together. The reason that I'm not making this rigid and not making it where you have to just get all of that information and do all of it at once is because that will be too much at once for you, and that will overwhelm you. So if I were to just dump this whole system at you at once and give you a video for each one of those strategies, I know what it's like to be a full-time SLP. I know that you're not going to be able to make that a habit. So rather than worrying about making it perfect and giving you all of that at once, I'm going to encourage you to just whenever month you're coming in on, in this language therapy advance, just complete the execution plans for that month and don't worry about trying to do this sequence perfectly right when you start out. Just work on, after you've been in the program for the year, you should be able to follow this sequence. And you should be able to implement this from step 1, but don't worry about doing that right off the bat. Your goal is to get to this, but it's okay if you put the pieces together separately along the way as you're learning the process. Because the main thing here is that you want to change your habits. And in order to change your habits, you've got to be able to try different pieces of the system one at a time. And you want to change your habits with baby steps, because otherwise, if you try to completely revamp everything at once, it's going to be overwhelming and you're not going to stick with it. And I want to give you this information in digestible chunks so that you're able to stick with it and truly change your habits. So this is what the big picture will look like once you have learned all the different strategies in the system. But know that your main goal is to just learn these strategies one at a time. And as you learn them, you're going to want to be trying them with your students wherever you are in this process. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this video, but I will look forward to seeing you in the next one.